in terms of current matters, I mean, it's not that amazing to be speaking after the Newcastle. We're moving on to something less positive, which is in 2023 is usually Chelsea actually on the pitch. Um, I mean, it's when we I think organised this podcast. I think it was probably after the Man City game. Sorry, so there was a
After
lot
Man
more.
City.
Yeah, so it was a lot more positive. But then of course Newcastle happened. What are kind of your feelings and emotions about the direction the club is heading in? Because it's very social media obviously always goes for the extremes, but it was very easy pre Newcastle to feel optimistic about the direction, even if things haven't been perfect. But then post, we've kind of gone back to the world's ending, everything's wrong. I mean, where do you sit and stand based on what you've seen so far this season?
This is a great question. I feel like the conversation we've had is almost like the perfect segue into it because ultimately we've both seen Chelsea win Champions Leagues. We've both seen Chelsea, soar into the sunset and do amazing things. And I think because of how our club was run for a long time, we had this sort of sustainable, unsustainable success where it was like at all costs, we're always going to win. And if we drop off, we bounce back straight back up. It's something that typically had not been seen in football before, where it wasn't cyclical. The cyclical was kind of like within the space of 2 seasons. You drop off one season and be straight back up there. Um, and what I tend to tell people is with where Chelsea are at the moment, it's a very different Chelsea to what a lot of people have been used to for a long time. And the reason why it's so hard to accept is because your perception is always going to be your perception. I mean, I watched Jose Mourinho not lose a game at Stamford Bridge. I watched us win Champions League. I watched us have a team that could essentially run itself without a manager. We're in a very, very, very different place now. And of course, proper Chelsea, the spirit of Chelsea, you always want to keep that in your mind. But it would be naive to think that that sort of lasts forever if the same thing is not in process. So post Roman and into the Boehly era, it's something I've always had in the back of my mind that we are not the Chelsea that we used to be. And that's okay. You have to build to try and get back to that place. I think what's so hard is when you partner that thought with the thought of spending so much money, people have a perception, well, 1+1 has to equal 2. Surely with this spend, we'll be back. And I think we're getting constant reminders that no, that's not how it works anymore, not for us anyway, because it's a different model. And like you just need to look at results this season. I mean, the Arsenal draw, Liverpool, City, Spurs, the teams that we should beat were not beaten. That is typically something that you'd expect of a top 6, 7 side, where it's like you can get that little result against the team there. But what you're going to be judged on is how you perform week in, week out as your base level. And those other big results are like that's additional benefit. That's great. You can put those in the bank. But your day-to-day rivals of the teams in and around you is where you're going to be judged. And that's just where Chelsea are. We're not a top 4 side at the moment. I mean, where did we finish last season? 10th. We finished 10th. That means there were a lot of teams better than us. We have removed a lot of experience from that squad. I mean, the midfield alone, you've lost a World Cup winner, a Euros winner, and a serious Champions League winner. You have a lot of young players coming in. These things are not fixed overnight. And I think ultimately it's a battle of wanting to believe that things can change quickly because it's Chelsea, but also having to get to a place where you accept that things won't change that quickly and you have to be patient. And that helps me sleep a lot better at night. Obviously, it's very frustrating, but this is going to take a long time. And, when Boehly came in, I remember when he did a conference speaking about there should be a North versus South game. And everyone was shaken up about it because he was trying to change what football's always been. Even this approach that we're doing, it's not the typical approach to what football is. So there's a lot of eyes wanting this to fail. Because it's like, well, you're trying to change something that's always been this way. And in my head, that gives me a chip on the shoulder that we're going to get this right. Because it's like, they want us to fail really badly. But it will take time. It will take time. I mean, I would love us to get Champions League football this season. I would love us to. But I think we have to be realistic that we need to set a foundation after how bad last year was. Right now, I mean, after 13 matches played, if I remember correctly, we're actually not better than we were last season. So it's about how quickly can we steady the ship and then hopefully go on a little run for the back end of the year or the back end of the season that puts us in a good place. So it's going to take time. It's going to take time.
I think it is culturally a big shift for Chelsea fans because, and I think the point you made about almost culturally the way Chelsea fans have been conditioned to kind of see the manager as irrelevant in the process is something that it almost feels like what we've seen over the last almost 2 years now. It's almost like a gag reflex of Chelsea fans is, well, we have to sack the head coach. We have to do this really quickly. We have to react to the next 2 weeks or everything's going to implode. And that's, I mean, I do think it's interesting looking back to last season with Graham Potter, whatever you think about him and where we are now. I really like Pochettino, but did the ownership think and get scared by the reaction? And that's why they made the change rather than they kind of thought this is only going in one direction. I think that's an interesting, there's so much to unpack with all of it really in terms of where Chelsea are going, but I personally feel with this ownership, and it's not to say that Poch can lose like 20 games in a row and everything's going to be here and accepted. That's never, I think there's a lot of straw man arguments that I see where it's like you're okay with us losing. No, of course I'm not. It ruins my weekends when Chelsea get battered. Like I don't,
Fact.
no part of 2023 other than very few exceptions have been enjoyable, but that's the biggest hurdle. Like I think to get through this period is without kind of just going back in the same cycle and staying in the kind of washing machine of short-termism is going to be a massive challenge, isn't it?
That's exactly it. I think I always have this conversation where football fans are fanatics, right? They're so obsessed with football, and because for some people it's like a religion, it means so much. When anything that's said that sort of kind of questions your beliefs, it's a hard hitting thing. We're talking about a club that won everything and continue to win everything and dominate for so long. So when you start having this thought where you sort of say, well, we may not win this year, already that kind of questions people's beliefs. Like, what do you mean we're not winning this year? What do you mean we're going to lose 5 games? What do you mean we're not going to win the game against the top 4? And it's a very difficult thing to accept. And ultimately, I'm one of those people where I'm of that mindset where you go into every game wanting to win every game. 100%. That's how I am. That's how I'm born and raised, whether I'm playing football, whether I'm playing FIFA or whatever, just supporting Chelsea. But there's a realization that football is definitely a process. And there's a lot of teams in the league, in terms of their process, whether they have the same quality as us or not, are in a very different place to us. And the balls are rolling. Whereas we're sort of, trying to get things into place. This season started off with a lot of injuries, a lot of young players. And one thing I always say about young players is naturally their form's just going to peak and trough naturally. Part of being a young player is finding sort of a level and then getting consistency. And that's when you start going to your peak. When you're in your peak, you know what your level is. Therefore, relying on a lot of youngsters is a very risky strategy. And it also puts pressure on the more experienced pros in the team. So, for instance, someone that I've got a lot of time for that is under constant pressure is Raheem Sterling, because in many people's minds, it's like you came from the champions, you're a proven winner, you've scored goals in the league, do it now. It's like, well, yeah, I'm sure he wants to and I'm sure he will, but the situation is not the same situation that he was in before. It takes time to acclimatize, get used to and get going again. So we will come good, in my opinion. I think it's just about, and I do trust Poch's approach. I feel like there's certain things that he has to adapt to, which he will, I think, over time. But the nature of having a young team is you're going to have moments when you're high, you're going to have moments where you're low. It's just that is football. Football's never changed as a game. That's always going to be a fundamental part of it.
It's kind of that. I mean, it is an intangible thing, but I think it is intangible. But it's not intangible because I think the numbers and the data kind of back it up so far this season. Like I know people look at the table currently, and they especially look at the way Chelsea collapsed at Newcastle, and they go, "What's changed?" And I know you brought it up in terms of you look at compare points to last season. But I can't honestly say, with the exception of Saturday's performance against Newcastle, that we're anywhere close to as bad as we were last season. Like it's not even comparable. Like last season was dreadful. Like it was joyless. It was not a nice experience, and it wasn't. There were very few times I watched Chelsea. I think Dortmund at home was the only time where I felt kind of a sense of pride watching Chelsea, and it was anything close. And it's not just, as we've been saying, it's not just about you have to win every single game. It's just like a basic level of just joy in watching your football team play. Like, what are they trying to do? I think there has been clear improvement, but I do think, look at what Arsenal have gone through in recent years. Like with Arteta, they went through, it's very easy to forget now, they went through some absolutely tragic moments with Arteta where I have to say majority of clubs would have pulled the trigger. Like I fully believe that Chelsea would have.
Turning point was beating us, where Saka scored the goal, where it was sort of the miss-hit cross. That was their turning point. They were at the lowest of lows before that. They got that win and nothing looks back for them. And I think a lot of people, you're always looking for what the turning point is. The Spurs result, everyone was like, oh my gosh, okay, we feel something. The City result, everyone was like, oh my gosh, we scored 4 goals against City. It's not been a 1-0 loss for the first time in how many years? There's something coming. And so then to have the Newcastle, it's like every time you have momentum, it's the wins knocked out of yourselves. But I think what is super important is what you said is right. We are not performing as bad as we did last year. I think what last year did show is, even though we were performing bad and we probably had more points at this point, was the sort of the balls moving in sense of, what to do to get result. We've got a much younger team now. It's a very, very, very different thing. I always look at a team like Manchester United, where on paper right now, the time we're speaking, they are the informed team in the country. They are woeful. They are a very, very bad footballing side. Tragic bad footballing side. But they're just in a place where, because there's experience in the team and there's know-how and there's these little things here and there, they're just able to sort of tick boxes. And it's like, what, on paper, it doesn't look that bad. It might be hell in the changing room, but we can sort of move forward and build from something. We're kind of going from building from the performances. And I guess the question is for everyone is, how long can the performances not turn into results before you start making, decisions? But I think we'll be okay. I think the festive period is always tricky. Injuries can always be testing. But if you can sort of pick up a bit of steam and go into New Year in a good place. I mean, I saw it last year with Villa. Villa were behind us and ended up in European places because Emery came in. He knew what he wanted to do. They kept going. There's no reason to say that Chelsea can't have one of those moments.
I was saying this in a show recently because I know the people were bringing up what Eddie Howe's done with Newcastle and kind of the differences in success. But, Eddie Howe's been the coach at Newcastle since November of 2021. So 2 years now. In that time, think about all the people who've been in the dugout at Chelsea. Like to even consider that Chelsea could have a coach for that period of time feels a little bit farcical, given how we had 3 last year. I'm not counting Bruno. I feel sorry for the bloke. He did game, but you're not counting. Like, it was a cameo. It wasn't, he wasn't a main character, so I can't really give it to him. But yeah, I just hope, because I really do think with Pochettino and what I've seen so far and some of the talents, and in Nkunku, I think, before final question, it's just, in Nkunku coming back, I feel like people have kind of forgotten the influence and significance of that player potentially on Chelsea. It's like, I think it's been quite convenient to leave Nkunku signing out to kind of make the point that Chelsea didn't sign anyone good in the summer. Like, we had a goal scorer and then he got injured.
The Nkunku one for me is so interesting because ultimately Nkunku is sort of the outlier in all of this. He is the one that was signed way before, and he's outside of this supposed over 25. He is the quote-unquote experienced player that's coming in. And obviously in pre-season, you saw what he brought to the team. I often talk about Chelsea being a team of stories. And the stories are that I feel like Raheem Sterling came to Chelsea to make it his team and have his moment and not be in the shadows. I feel like Nkunku had the same thing as well, leaving Leipzig. I want to prove myself in the Premier League. He's going to get that opportunity now. I guess what the injury's done, though, is put so much pressure. It's almost like we need you to be the hero. And I guess it's just about managing the expectation of that, because the body can burn out very quickly, number one. And number two, him coming in doesn't mean that everything should be on him. Him coming in means that things should collectively, hopefully, in those areas be a lot better. I mean, Cole Palmer's a player that when we were linked with, I said, get him in the door. He has great footballing fundamentals. He's very versatile and he can be coached to do certain things. And he's shown that. We have players that optimize in different ways as well. I guess what's tricky or interesting with the Nkunku addition is it then means that we probably have a few weeks of altering a way to play with him. How long does it take to acclimatize to that? Can we get results in that period? And then what does that mean for whoever has to drop out as well, is where it gets interesting. But again, this is a professional environment. I'm sure they know what's coming. I did a shoot recently with a few of the players. And like, yeah, all I kept hearing was, yeah, Crystal. Like he seems to have this sort of aura on the training ground. So it's going to be really, really good to see him. And for him personally, I really hope that this is a great move for him as well, because I think a lot of people realize that the season that he had is not even the season that he got bought off. It was prior to that. So he put up those numbers, then, okay, I'm not going to come and deliver again. And it got robbed of him in the last minute. But it'll be interesting to see how he acclimatizes and how he delivers.